Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Rochelle Harrison-Pless. Coming up, a fierce legal challenge at the 11th hour. Kenya's opposition files a petition at the country's Supreme Court fighting last week's presidential election results. Opposition leader Raila Odinga insisting the vote was a sham. Mass burials continue in Sierra Leone following Monday's devastating mudslides. As the death toll climbs, aid groups warn of a potential health crisis as uncollected bodies pile up. And it's full steam ahead for South Africa's so-called Train of Hope, a mobile health clinic providing affordable health care to thousands of people across the country. Good to have you with us. Down to the wire, Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga left it to the last minute to file a petition at the country's Supreme Court in order to fight the results of last week's presidential election, challenging incumbent leader Uhuru Kenyatta, who won a second term in power with more than 54% of the vote. The opposition claims the election was rigged and that the results are a sham. Earlier I spoke to our Nairobi correspondent Julia Steers. She has more on what's next for the opposition's legal challenge.
In the coming weeks, the 7 justices of the Supreme Court here will have to decide this case. It's a case that Odinga is still saying is one of election fraud. He is still claiming that there was an algorithm introduced into the computer of the Electoral Commission system in order to rig the election against him. So now that it's submitted tonight by the deadline, they will have about 3 weeks to let this play out in court. It has to play out by the time that President Kenyatta can be sworn in. He was originally set to be sworn in by the end of August. Now that has been pushed back to September 12th. So we expect, obviously, for it to be carried out by then. And this is not the first time that Odinga has been here. He filed a very similar case in 2013 when he also lost the election then. The case was dismissed then, and he was quick to tell supporters when he announced that he would be filing this case that he still does not have a tremendous amount of faith in the Kenyan court system. He was saying, and his people were telling us today, that this is a chance for the Kenyan courts to redeem themselves from previous corruption. So he's already sort of hedging his bets in case he loses. There were some supporters outside of the courthouse today. We spoke to them, and some of them were disappointed that he was going to court. Others told us that this was just the next step in the justice process for them, that if they don't get justice in court, they could be back out in the streets again, like we saw in demonstrations right after the election. And those demonstrating outside of the courthouse today told us that there could be more from them yet.
Now, Julia Steers reporting from Nairobi there. There is no fight that scares me. Defiant words from the Rwandan president who's been sworn in for a third term. Paul Kagame used his inauguration speech to hit back at criticism by international rights groups over his re-election earlier this month. The longtime leader, who has held power for nearly 2 decades, won nearly 99% of the vote, amid accusations of electoral fraud and voter intimidation. Several African heads of state attended Friday's ceremony, which took place at the National Stadium in Kigali. Next, bloodshed in Burundi. According to police, 3 people were killed and dozens of others wounded in the capital Bujumbura on Thursday night. In a brazen attack, grenades were hurled at 2 bustling bars in the city's Buyenzi neighborhood. It comes only a week after a similar attack on another bar in the same area. Now, is she or isn't she above the law? Conflicting reports are swirling over whether South Africa has granted diplomatic immunity to Zimbabwe's First Lady. Grace Mugabe, wife of Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, is accused of assaulting a woman in a Johannesburg hotel. South African police on Thursday placed a red alert on the country's borders to prevent her from fleeing. For more details, earlier I spoke to our Cape Town correspondent Jane Flanagan. She says the alleged victim's legal team has brought in the big guns to handle the case, notably a prosecutor nicknamed the Bulldog. Take a listen.
Harry Nell, who gave Oscar Pistorius such a terrible time in the witness box over a number of days at his murder trial, is now taking on the case of Grace Mugabe, and the lawyers acting for Gabriela Engels have said they're getting paperwork in order now in the event that she is granted immunity, so they can go straight to the High Court and stop that from happening. Intriguingly, Mrs. Mugabe is due to appear tomorrow morning at a First Spouses program for this weekend's SADC conference. Robert Mugabe flew in on Wednesday, 2 days early for the conference. He was due to be here in South Africa this weekend, and whether Mrs. Mugabe shows her face or not tomorrow is going to be intriguing, and all eyes are on that conference. Normally, that would be something that the media would struggle to get very excited about covering, but I think tomorrow no one's going to be reluctant to go along and see if Grace Mugabe does present herself. The police are saying that they have received paperwork from the Zimbabwe authorities seeking some immunity from prosecution, but Zimbabwe sources are claiming that it's in the bag, that immunity will be given. South Africa authorities at the moment are refusing to confirm that it has been granted and just says that the process is in place. So tomorrow, another day in this very big saga that's now run for a number of days, and it's the plot is thickening.
Jane Flanagan in Cape Town there. To Sierra Leone now, where mass burials continue to be held for the victims of Monday's devastating mudslide in the capital Freetown. More than 460 people have been laid to rest. But the death toll is expected to climb as some 600 others remain missing. Meanwhile, aid workers on the ground are sounding the alarm. They say the country is on the brink of a health crisis, as bodies buried in the mud could contaminate water sources and spark an outbreak of diseases. Laurent Berstecker has the story.
A country in mourning. Sierra Leone continued to bury its dead on Friday in some 400 graves dug in haste just outside the capital. The ceremony was attended by President Ernest Bai Koroma, who paid an emotional tribute to the victims.
We have come together to share the agony inflicted upon our nation by the pitiless floods. This is another painful episode in our nation's history.
Heavy rains led to the collapse of a hillside in Freetown on Monday, destroying dozens of homes and leaving hundreds of residents stranded or trapped. The United Nations says over 4,000 people have been affected by the landslide, making it one of the worst natural disasters in the country's history.
It's really hard to see our compatriots get buried like this. Our brothers, our sisters, and our children are dead.
Rescue operations continued on Friday, as over 600 people were still reported missing, according to the Red Cross. The organization has warned of a growing risk of disease outbreak if the remaining bodies aren't quickly found and buried.
And finally, it's full steam ahead for the so-called Train of Hope, a mobile health clinic providing affordable healthcare to thousands of people across South Africa. 2 trains known as Pelo Pepper regularly crisscross the country, reaching those in remote rural areas and some of South Africa's most neglected communities. Thanks to its runaway success, a 3rd train may soon hit the tracks.
All these people are waiting to go on board this train, even though it won't move. In fact, inside, it's a clinic. The train spends up to 2 weeks at each stop. The aim is to provide affordable and swift healthcare to poor South Africans in remote areas.
What we have observed as we travel with the Pelo Pepper train, most of the provinces, we realize that patients will go to the hospital and then they have been screened. Some of them, it takes so long for them to receive their spectacles. Whereas when you come on Pelo Pepper healthcare train, we've got the same-day service.
The train is run by the company Transnet, and the doctors and medicine are funded by the pharmaceutical firm Roche. The clinic is cheaper than public hospitals. For example, patients are charged just $2 for a pair of glasses.
It's actually a very great initiative, and it actually helps to, those people who actually have challenges with eyesight and stuff like that.
Doctors and medical students are kept busy.
There are a lot of patients we see, compared to where we come from in the hospital. Maybe we see per person, I see maybe like 20 patients.
The mobile train clinic was launched in 1994, and since then it has reached over 23 million people.
That's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. More news coming up when Live from Paris continues. Don't go away.
Mm-hmm.